Um, Today we're doing an institutional approach to the study of self-organization and self-governance in CPR situations. It was a bit of a dense chapter, but I think it had a lot of very interesting stuff. And we can try this. Hi, Beretta.
Hey, hey.
Welcome. So we can start to pass around and see if anyone brought up a topic to discuss. I'll pass to Nate.
So the topic that I think would be fun to discuss would be the separating the resource system from the actual flow of resource units, in terms of how we picture that in DAOs and decentralized networks.
Cool. We were talking a little bit about this in the call we were having just now. Do you want to pass it to someone?
Yeah, I'll pass it to Tam.
Hey, thanks. So I have to confess that I haven't read the chapter, and I'll be doing mostly a lot of listening in. But I hope to keep coming to this book club and read the chapter before the next one. And I will pass it to Tonga.
Yeah, I wasn't able to read the book. I tried, but I wasn't. So I'm sorry. I'll pass it to Grace.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm still in chapter 1. So I'll pass it to Sean.
Thanks, Griff. Yep, same boat as well. So this is my first time joining the book club. And do you guys have a resource? Like, is this book available online somewhere easily?
Yeah, the link is in the channel. I think it's one of the first messages of the channel, but I can post there again.
Sure, or stick it as a pinned message would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I don't have anything to add yet, but I'll get the book up and I'll start scanning through it as we go. And I'll pass it to Barata. Oh wait, did you? No, you went.
Oh no, well I said hi, but
Oh yeah.
As far as topics of the day go, one thing that seemed really interesting to me is the way the game changes in an iterated game versus single shot. So in chapter 1, they talked a lot about how the prisoner's dilemma only holds under a few constraints, right? Players can't communicate, etc. In this game, or in chapter 2, they talked kind of about how over time, players' preferences for cooperation versus defection would also be modified based on like their time horizon. So if they expect that, how far along they are in the game, what they expect the other agents to do, and if they expect the future rollout of rewards to be in some greater than the immediate payoff of defection, and kind of that balance, because that greatly expands how we think about the game, which is kind of in chapter 1, what Ostrom said was a really important thing, is to not get locked into this very narrow view of things, but understand the variables that affect the game itself and the players in the game, and how to expand that to achieve optimal outcomes. Does that make sense? Or should I TLDR that?
Yeah, okay. That's great. The TLDR, I put that the way the game changes on an iterated game versus the time rates for the TLDR, but you can change there.
Yeah, so I think it's an iterated game plus players preferences for time horizons, right? Because humans value immediate things generally a whole lot more. And so how in an iterated game, the time horizon of players affects their choice to cooperate or defect.
Cool. Thank you. Does anybody else? Atta, do you have something?
Yes. I was quite fascinated by these two mentions of one, how changing technology affects the viability of governing a commons, and two, that one of the biggest problems that needs to be solved for a well-performing commons is mutual monitoring, mutual accounting. And I think this is something that relates quite substantially to crypto, and it also got me excited to think about, like how crypto could be applied and how like mutual monitoring with this new emergent technology can reach new levels with like very increased scale for commons. Yeah, so I would like to also discuss about this. Is anyone else left?
I also find interesting, like when it says like there is some people who is I read in Spanish it says oportunistas, but it's the people is just there and draining the things of the commons. And I think she talks about good stuff, like how to deal with that, like not how to deal, but like it's were two things, like governance and I read in Spanish and I don't know if the words are good, but like government and I think company, and how like different systems to deal with that. And yeah, that's what I found more interesting, like to bring it up.
Were you talking about the state versus the firm? Is that?
Yeah, those are probably the words in English.
Oh, that's really good. We have all different topics. Just 1 minute to make sense of them. Maybe we can start talking about this 3 puzzles of supply commitment and monitoring that she was talking about, how that's the most difficult challenges we have in a commons. One, to ensure that we can bring supply, and supply in the sense of rules, like how can we bring a set of rules in a collaborative way, because there's also the independent, interconnected, and collaborative points that she brings. So bringing rules in a collaborative way that players understand that they are interconnected and that they want to collaborate. So I thought it was really interesting how one of the solutions she proposed for that was trust and community building. And Angela asked me a question the other day saying, like, why are we not like Gitcoin grants? What makes a commons different from a Gitcoin grants, for example? And I think this hits that, in a sense of we need to build trust to ensure that we are agreeing to act in an interoperable way. So I thought, I think that deals with opportunistic behavior as well, and how and it starts to tap a bit into mutual accounting. So that goes into the monitoring, that it's another subject. So yeah, does anybody has anything to connect with the topics that you brought based on this?
So I think that one of the things that the hard part about analyzing that type of framework and understanding the problems, especially when it comes to the commitment problem, is understanding what Ostrom called a credible commitment, and understanding what identifying a credible commitment is in real life, because you have so many different players and actors that come in and out of a system who may act like they're committed or think that they're committed, but it's hard to identify them as an active role or an active player within understanding that resource system.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to maybe build on that is, you know, in the context of iterated games, right? If agents interact with each other, they'll start to remember like who acts in what way, right? So agents can build reputation. And so in the context of the, you know, social capital of saying like, you know, well, if there's like a cultural norm of how people behave, people can build that into their assumption of how things will roll out, which is awesome. But then also there's the dichotomy there where that works at a smaller scale, where the agents they interact with each other frequently enough to build a reputation model of each other. And also that there are enough people that they remember all the people they interact with. But then achieving that at scale becomes quite a different thing. So I thought it was kind of interesting because you can kind of weigh the kind of Axelrod tit for tat games where you have, you know, different agents interact and they kind of learn from each other. And then you can also weigh the kind of like CPR policy thing where like everyone gets together and interacts over the shared resource to build the social capital. And the two are very similar, but then they also branch out if you like, you know, try to scale them out.
Does anybody else have a problem with reputation, or at least our conception of how we use reputation, especially within the networks that we're participating in right now, just because it's just so kind of binary? It's like either you have reputation or you don't, yet it doesn't tell you any type of characteristics of what that reputation actually means.
I think reputation is inevitable. I think measuring reputation brings like a gamifiable situation into the picture.
Like the Dark Mirror episode.
Oh, I don't know. What happens there?
Reputation just ends up influencing social behavior.
In a dystopic way.
Yeah, like if you know about the Chinese social credit score experiment they're rolling out, which is now being rolled out pretty widely, I think. Essentially, you get a score. It's like a credit score, but it's a social credit score based on all the things. And that affects the lending rates you get, where you can travel, what jobs you get, how much your posts get shown on various social networks, like all the things. So it's pretty much that.
Actually, connecting that to commons, and in a hypothetical situation, we could imagine those like Chinese citizen scores with really high impact on someone's social life being put as like collateral to establish like this kind of commitment or this kind of skin, to avoid the fear of, you know, like free rider, or like increasing the cost of being caught while being monitored. So although it's bad, quantifying reputation doesn't seem to be hindering the development of commons for China.
Yeah, and I think they actually do that, where like, you know, if you do something like commit a crime or whatever, it does ding your credit score, right? Which affects other areas of your life. So like, yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things they're trying to achieve. But in the context of like a CPR or something, it'd be really interesting. So you have like the fishermen who are rolling out there, right? And then they all agree, like, we're going to fish, you know, X per day or something. And then one doesn't. If that affects their, you know, their social score, that might influence their behavior more than just saying, oh, well, you get a fine because you fished too many fish this day or something, right? So that might change the game there too.
Yeah, I think that ties both with the point you brought, Beretta, of like how behaviors change, the players change with time constraints. Because one of the examples she gave was that the fisherman that has a little boat, he's not going to fish way more than he needs in a way that would harm that ecosystem, because he wants their future generations to have access to that resource. But then if a huge boat is on the open sea and they have no relationship with nobody in that ocean, but they want the immediate profit of that fish, they're not going to think about the long-term damage they would cause in that environment. So that's kind of a case of reputation, or at least awareness of the ecosystem that you're inserted in. And that also ties with the state and firm type of enforcement, that both mainly the state, not as much the firm, but mainly the state uses fear to control the outcomes that are going to come from the collective. And then that's kind of what she's proposing, like an exit for not having one person putting down what is going to be the behavior, that it's kind of what's happening in China with the collateral that you were saying.
So I don't. Oh, sorry. So I don't yet have a point to what I'm thinking now. So I'm just going to riff on the idea of reputation, and thinking about reputation as extremely valuable to a community, because it allows you to predict behavior of certain individuals, and in small communities, it allowed you to know who and who not to trust in your local community, which used to be really geographically based. So it was valuable to survival to have an idea of the reputation of the people with whom you cohabitated and or co-villaged, whatever the right word is for that. And our sense of reputation now far exceeds the scope of our local communities, specifically the people that we maybe depend on our day-to-day. And now our reputation has sort of gone out into into different areas, and is used for different measures, in a more I don't know what's what I'm looking for, like anonymous, not anonymous, but like unknown, stranger. That word is the word I'm looking for, like somebody who doesn't know, but I've seen I might buy a product that they recommend because I know that this person has recommended other good products or other good books or other good movies. Or so it's sort of, reputation now is more interest driven, I think, and can be used for many different things than it used to be. And I think that's producing some interesting results in terms of trusting people by their reputation without actually knowing who they are, but just on their past actions, and they can still be anonymous to us. Like I said, I don't have any great conclusion. I was just a little riff on the things that I was thinking while everyone else was sparking interest in my mind.
I think a really interesting thing with that, right, is if you have this reputation system and then you can use it to interact with people where you might not have had the personal opportunity to build up a, relationship or view of them, but you know that there's a system that does, that kind of scales the social capital from the villagers with their cultural norms to a larger thing, kind of like what China is doing. Although there's a key difference, because for it to work in the common pool resource system, right, at least as far as in chapter 1, what they described as the things, the people participating in the system need to be helping to design and build the system and participate in it, right? Because if you have a system that measures reputation, that reputation score is only as valuable as your trust in the system itself. Because if you don't trust the system, it doesn't matter what reputation scores it spits out. So for a large group of people to then use a reputation system, they have to collectively agree to it for it to have value. So it's kind of interesting how the same principles of the smaller common pool resources then kind of scale out as well, because you have to have a system that people agree on and want to use, and that they value the system, etc.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting topic, and especially because it also raises questions about how the collected kind of data points on people can be utilized, or can they be, for these kind of monitoring or commitment issues. Right now, insurance companies are using credit scores for their own decision, which is, of course, like problematic in its structure, etc. For the people to create a commons and create a reputation, though, I don't think they need to start from scratch in designing the kind of the reputation scores they want to see. First of all, because this is itself a technological and technical barrier, and I mean, this would be the ideal situation. But again, like going to China's case, for example, if I were to live in a village in China and we were to have a technology that allowed us to collateralize our reputation scores to engage in a project, and basically we govern the commons, but the source we use do not come directly from us, but from the government. And there are direct consequences for the impact of these scores on someone's life, which means we don't need to start from scratch in designing the reputation score. And I think then it means these kind of reputation scores with real impacts can also be used as the primary building tools for the commons. Like again, like imagining some village to create a commons in their community, and what is the source that they can use to monitor each other available in terms of reputation score. I don't think they need to design it from the ground up. Yeah.
Yeah, like if they're using it as a collateral source, then no, any collateral would do, right? But I was saying if the reputation itself is like a commons, right? It's like our collective view of reputation. Then people would have to opt into it, because otherwise you kind of have this like dystopia versus utopia like drift, where one is like the state, where like she was talking about the firm and the state, there's a single entity that determines the rules and they enforce the things and etc. And what they determine is reputation is the thing you can use. So if you agree with them as to what reputation is, then yes, you can use it. But if you disagree with them, then you're kind of like, eh. Whereas if the reputation system itself is a commons, then people can collectively decide what they value as reputation, and that system can reflect the values of the people participating. But regardless of those two, yeah, any collateral source that you deem to be worthy collateral could be used to put down to participate in another commons as well. So.
Nate, do you want to talk a little bit more about separating the resource system from the flow of the units?
Yeah, I think it's just it's very difficult to when we put it in a framework to analyze what those units are. So if we were to take this, keep going with this reputation system, what that reputation is and the flow of those units and how we treat the flow of those units is different than how we treat the entire system as a whole. So if we look at the entire system, Barada's right. We have to have a collective trust in that system for it to have any useful utility for us. However, the flow of those units is just as important in analyzing how that reputation is divvied out to people and when it is divvied out to people and why is another frame of analysis that needs to be separated from the system itself. And the two are dependent upon each other. So that collective trust in that reputation system is only as good as the processes that we create for it. And I just think that's it's kind of a cut and dry situation when it comes to reputation in this sense, but when it comes to other CPRs and like the general environment and things of that nature, it's a lot more difficult to distinguish the two.
I mean, to distinguish what is the system and what is the unit of that system?
More so distinguishing the system from the processes of the system. Let's see. Try to give me a minute to think about a good example of that.
Well, not sure. I mean, Griff can actually probably speak to this a bit more, but I think from reading through the Common Stack stuff, I think this is one of the things Common Stack aims to help with, right? Is to like say, okay, well, the management of this commons is really important, and you're going to need to have like some general tools, some like analysis, a process to engage in governance, etc. And I think like with that, there's the idea is like, okay, well, let's design some templates for these systems, but let's also give you a process to engage with that system, manage that system, understand it, and have it, continue on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little uncomfortable speaking since I haven't read the book. I don't know if Olivia wants to talk more on this than I do.
I think it's similar to what we were talking about before of having the stock, like she calls the system the stock, right? Like everything that is inherent to that system to produce the units of flow. So everything that affects on the resource itself that people can take it in and out of that system is this stock. And I think you were I think you hit on the point, Barada, to build the structure. So the flow starts to be self-generated from that structure, and then the appropriators can come and make use of the values that are being produced by these tools and the system and these processes. But I think, yeah, maybe you don't need to have read the book to talk about this point, Griff, if you want to compliment.
Well, definitely the making sure that the appropriators are placed appropriately in the system and that they're planned for is definitely part of the Common Stack design. Just making sure that, in the initialization where the hatchers, the people who really know about how to provide best for the CPR, they are allowed to enter. Like people with small boats, as was mentioned, can initialize the system. And then people with large boats that maybe they don't care about the system as much, but they still want to extract value from it, they can come in later and still participate if they want in the governance of the system. But then at the same time, we know that the bulk of the governance is still held by people with small votes that really care about the future of the commons. At least that's what I can say off of this comment.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to what was kind of talked about in chapter 1, which is that for the system itself to work as intended, the people who use it and are engaged with it and deeply understand it need to be the ones who help design and steer the system and the process, right? They can't have just an outside, organization come in and say, okay, now you're going to do this. Like, they're generally, like, the map's not going to match the territory, right? They're going to miss. So you need the people who are actively engaged in the system, with skin in the game, who understand it, who have deep expertise, to actually help design it and help manage and steer it. And then in chapter 2, there's actually also a part where she says, a major source of uncertainty is a lack of knowledge. And she talks about how the resource system itself and its characteristics have to be established. And that requires a blending of scientific knowledge and local time and place knowledge. So you need both. You need the people who are like engaged in the system, who understand it. And then you also need some sort of like data-driven analysis or model or some kind of thing. And then you combine the two, and you can hopefully then, steer the commons to the benefit of all parties involved.
I think a lot of
yeah. Okay, no, I'm just gonna say that a great advantage we have in that point, I think, is because she says a major problem for acquiring information is how expensive information is. So I think we are very privileged in this sense here of how there are so many people like actually engaged with education and wanting to educate others.
Yeah, so I just had a question in terms of that, because I have a hard time understanding how we educate people, especially like in case of a CPR, appropriators on long-term risks. Because, like Beretta said before, that, there's a time variable where we want the immediate results now. And like, even if like you take a long-term risk, like an earthquake, like people here in the Bay Area, they know the risk of an earthquake happening, yet somehow they believe it's not going to happen to them on the day that it occurs. And so they sit there and they ignore the problem until the day it does happen. And they say, oh man, how did we not see this coming? And I just, I see that issue within a lot of CPR situations where you have these resource systems that are threatened by long-term risks, but we can't educate on those long-term risks very well.
It's probably because we don't know about them yet. And that's something that she was also talking about, how it's so difficult to create one type of model that fits everything, because each model is so different. And the fact that they're different with different types of behaviors, with different rules, is going to change the consequences that system is going to have in the future. So she was talking about how it's so important to have the mindset of trial and error, and to continue to improve and have and know for sure that there will always be something that you weren't prepared for, that is unexpected. Like education minimizing these things, for sure, these impacts.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting, because I remember in chapter 2 at one point she talked about trial and error, and she's like, yeah, if there is like an unbounded scope, or if you don't know the limits of your system, you are learning by trial and error, right? Like, it doesn't matter how many models you have, if you don't actually know the entirety of your system, like, it's trial and error. And that means error. Error is inevitable if you're learning by trial and error. So that was an interesting thing. And then I think a little farther down, she mentioned like, yeah, we don't really have a complete view of how to get around this. Like this is a really hard thing, but just be aware that like, if you don't understand the limits of your system, you are going to discover them via trial and error. So yeah.
Maybe that ties to your point, Atta, of how changing technology changed the liability of governing a commons.
Yeah, in fact, I also wanted to bring this because the two problems of supply that she's talking about is, no, sorry, the two problems of consumption, consuming the commons were, appropriation problems. And then the next one is the provision problems. So the supplying of the commons, like the nourishing of the commons. And I think that also relates most directly to the digital commons, because they need like sustaining the human inputs. Human capital is the one that makes it a renewable resource rather than in contrast to a natural resource like a fishery. And I wanted to bring this to, although I don't know much yet, and I'm looking forward to take the education, the educational course to CAD-CAD, and how it stands as a technology to address this kind of provision problem for the commons, and maybe like solve some of the problems that Ostrom is mentioning in this chapter. And I wanted to ask you guys, or those involved with CAD-CAD, how do you think it relates to this?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things CAD-CAD can do. But one thing I started doing today is actually building a model for this iterated game to look at like, okay, if you have different players with different preferences, how might their preferences change based on, you know, the amount of resources they have, and then how might that affect their usage of this commons, and then contrast their usage to the renewal rate and see like if you can achieve a stable equilibrium or whatnot. So I think like CAD-CAD can help you kind of test out a lot of these things where like, you know, intuitively you can do a lot of like back of the napkin, like, you know, kind of rough hand wavy calculations, but like this can help you, CAD-CAD can help you drill down into a little more depth. And then as far as circling that back to then, you know, helping educate the people who are using these types of systems, I think a picture says 1,000 words. So the cool thing with CAD-CAD is you can like, you know, write out the code, but then you can plot it and you can make a picture and you can share the picture with people and see like, look, see, it changes over time. This is the good part. This is the bad part. We want to avoid that. So we want to do this. So it goes up in this direction, up and to the right. Right. So yeah, I think CAD-CAD can help you like, you know, test out your intuition and drill down into more detail on things, as well as potentially communicate that to people in a more intuitive way via pictures and plots and graphs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of CAD-CAD. I'm also a little skeptical of its use initially for designing your first commons, you know. But ideally, if you have to back test your models, I mean, in the end, the cool thing with CAD-CAD and the dream of CAD-CAD is that you're trying to take. You can learn from previous mistakes. You can take data from other models that already exist and use that to improve a model that you already have. So imagine the first bridge that was ever built. If someone created, maybe not the first one, but the first model for a bridge that was built, that model probably sucked, right? Like it didn't predict a whole lot of great things. You know, they used best practices to make a model for that bridge. But then when they use the model when that bridge had problems. Oh, why is there a crack here? You know, they can improve that model so that we didn't account for the fact that the temperature gets so low here that this affects the integrity of the steel. I'm making stuff up, but whatever, right? Or you know, and then they keep building and improving the model and improving the bridges and improving the model and improving the bridges. And then Tacoma Narrows Bridge, where the bridge starts going waving because of the wind blowing and at the wrong speed and it not being designed to manage the wind properly. Now that gets added to every model from there on, and that problem doesn't happen to anybody using these models to build bridges. And so for CAD/CAD, I see it as kind of a similar thing where for the first models, you know, it's kind of hit or miss. You can kind of just justify whatever you want by designing a model that fits what you want to say. The people who are building the models have kind of an undue advantage, I would say, to push for their own agenda. But eventually, when these models get a lot of use and they start to have a life of their own and they start being back tested by data from hundreds of economies, then we start getting something really useful where we can start building economies the same way we build bridges with certain amounts of certainty. And so it's a long-term play for me with CAD/CAD. And really it's a public good that is something for the long-term, like, designers of economies. But maybe the people who are using it now are really just, you know, it's a little bit of they're doing everyone in the future a favor, but I wouldn't say it ends up helping them as much as they might think.
Zap, do you want to talk a little bit more about your topic of the firm and the state and how to deal with opportunistic behavior?
Well, yeah, I was like reading it, and I was like thinking like we could have like some sort of feedback, like how we could implement that on tech. Like, for example, right now, like I feel it's a lot of built-in trust, but I was thinking like we could implement some of this. Like, what do you think, guys?
What exactly do you mean? Implement what exactly?
Like on the book, it says like it's like the firm and the government, and when people have like somewhere like you know, like they belong to that firm or that, like the book was talking about like those two different models. Like one is more small and the other one is bigger. Like both of them like have also problem. For example, like in a government, you can have like the problem like the one who is governing, like it's like corrupted or stuff, like something in between. Like how could we implement that what the book is saying on the tech project?
I think you mean from my understanding, she brings the state and the firm kind of in a parallel of something she talks in the first chapter, that is the only way out. And she talks about how a lot of the centralized capitalist behavior is justified by corporations or by the state, saying that people don't have the ability to organize themselves, and that's why they need either a ruler or an entrepreneur. So I think after she presents the state and the firm and showing how their mechanism works, why it makes sense for both the rulers and the people to be in this system, but how it's not the best outcome for people in the long run. I think that's when she starts to bring the collective action and all of this suggestions of how we can try to have another alternative that it's not the state or the firm, but one that we can self-organize collectively. And that's where it comes the three problems that are
Yeah, I understand now. Yeah, I was like maybe I misunderstood. Like I was thinking like yeah, like for example, we need like you say like yeah, it's like a first stage. Like for example, someone do something wrong and it has to be punished somehow. But yeah, what you just say now, it makes a lot of sense. Like it's like the next step.
I think one thing that's important to specify here is that so at least my understanding here is in the context of exploring the different options available. There's like there's the state, there's the firm, and then there's also the commons. And so running through chapter 2, essentially they said like, look, if you've got agents who are independently acting, not communicating, they are generally going to take suboptimal actions that will likely lead to ruin of the common pool resource. There are then some ways that people organize. There is the firm, which generally works out if you have like a capitalist type model, right? Okay, great. It's generally better for the founder, but they take more risk, more reward, etc. Cool. Then there's the state. And she explained in the state model how still, for many agents, it actually can be more beneficial for them to be part of a state that achieves some level of organization than to just act independently, right? And then with that, though, there are some things that are not addressed by the firm or the state, in which place a common pool resource could very much be beneficial because we don't have something that's addressing that need. And so I think it's important to understand the context in which these different forms of organization are effective or needed, and not just to think one is better than the other, because one size doesn't fit all, right? Like that for different contexts, different things are needed. And so, yeah, I think that's important to emphasize because, as far as I know, when Ostrom described them, she described them in the context of what they achieve, and she also described the bounds in which they will no longer work. So I think it's important to specify.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation.
Another thing too, I guess, is that if we're talking about kind of like the evolution of these things, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where you've got a decentralized data store that's verified by cryptography of some sort, and rules that are enforced by some sort of cryptographic code that's executed deterministically, that can help potentially expand the scope of where these common pool resource type things could be then implemented in a digital way and or at scale. So like that new technology kind of expands the scope of what before was addressable by these common pool resource type of organizations.
Another thing like that caught my attention. She says like uncertainty and repetition creates cooperativity. I didn't understood the whole, but like this phrase really caught my attention because yeah, it's like some way to create cooperativity.
Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, uncertainty and repetition creates cooperativity.
What is the first one?
Uncertainty. I don't pronounce it well. Like
yeah.
Uncertainty and repetition. That's interesting.
I thought I heard cooperation and uncertainty. Was it?
Uncertainty and repetition create cooperation.
Yeah, how does uncertainty go there? That's, I think, what I'm thinking.
Yeah, you made me think.
Well, is it that we're saying that in a situation with high degrees of uncertainty, establishing reputation allows you to then, have leverage social capital to create trust to lower the cost of doing business? So instead of having to spend a lot on, overhead to enforce lots of things and design really complex systems, you can generally say, well, I trust that we're going to be okay. So it lowers the, essentially the cost of doing business. And is that kind of what we're pointing to?
It sounds to me more like a trial and error kind of thing, like uncertainty and repetition. Like despite our uncertainty, we continue to try, and because we all don't know, because we have this common base of uncertainty, we want to collaborate with each other because finding some type of certainty would serve the collective.
Yeah, I just found the page where she talks about that, but yeah, it's in Spanish. I think I should next time read in English, but like it's almost in the end of the chapter. Like she's talking like somewhat demonstrates that there is a play of DP, of repetition, and somehow uncertainty. Yeah, I mean, I cannot translate it so fast. Like, yeah, it says like that. I say at the beginning, like those two things create cooperativity. But it would need like one player tells to the other player like his intention of cooperation, with the hope. Yeah, I don't know how to say it.
What is the heading for that section that you're reading from?
Like it's on page 83, but on the Spanish version. Like it's almost in the end of the chapter.
$83.
Meanwhile, you guys are looking for it. We have 5 minutes left. And it's time to raffle the pen. So let's see who's gonna be the big winner. And we can we can close this session just so we finish on time, because last time we passed a little bit of the hour. And thank you so much for everyone joining. So 2 things that I want us to do before we go. One is raffle the pen, and then second is decide who is gonna. Next chapter. I think Juan Carlos said he wanted to facilitate, so we already have a facilitator for chapter 3. And then if you guys feel like grabbing any other chapter while they are still available, let me know. So, okay. Ata is number 1. Nate is number 2. Tam number 3, Griff 4, Tonga 5, Zap 6, Barata 7. Number 3. Tam, you won.
Can I say one thing? I'm looking at chapter 3. It's really quite long. Do you think maybe it would be worth breaking it into 2 sections, or just no?
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I also think it's pretty
Can we
long.
do a quick vote?
But yeah, I think it's pretty long. But I mean, we also have a week. But yeah, I think it would be interesting. Like as Tamara says, it can be so we can deploy more in depth.
Yeah, same. And in fact, right in the middle, there's a separation between the first analyzed case studies and then the theories. So it would in fact be quite interesting to see how we theorize about these cases first, and then look at Ostrom's take the next week.
Where is that demarcation? Actually, is there a title?
88. After 88, I think it's theory. Before 88, between 58 and 88, it's basically analyzing cases across the world.
So then so similarities among enduring self-governing CPR institutions would be part 2.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds good to me. Should we do a very quick closing round just so we can like agree, don't agree with the separation, and anything anybody wants to share last before we go? So I agree. I think we can split in 2. That might be easier for more people to read, and yeah, and just say thank you. I think it was a great discussion, and I'll try to organize these notes later. And I pass to Nate.
I agree with the separation of the chapter. I think it'd be easier to do that way. Yeah. Thank you for everybody participating. I'll pass it to Tam.
I also agree with separating. I think it's very dense, and I think it takes me time to really absorb it. And I commit to reading it before the next one. And thank you. Thanks for having this, Livia, and thanks to everyone who's joining. And I pass it to Barata.
Yeah, 88 looks good. Oh, I'll pass Ziptimus. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, you pronounced it well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. But because I was reading the first chapter in English, and I was like, wow, it's super hard to read. And then I swapped to Spanish, and still hard to read. So, so I think like if we separate, and yeah, we can focus more, and it will be better. And I also think that would be super interesting. Like I don't know if that's possible, but like if we're reading during the week, and maybe through the chat of this Discord, we can also like say like the things we are interested in, and so we are more prepared when we're talking here, and that would be awesome. I'm going to do that for sure. And I'll pass it to Ata.
I'm for it. I pass it to Tonga.
Yeah, I agree too. It's going to be easier to read half. So yeah, thank you all.
I pass to Griff.
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I mean, honest, I hope I get to read it. We'll see. I'm still trying to come back from next week, but seems like a good idea. It's a beast. Like this chapter is as long as the last 2 chapters. So, and is that everyone?
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Great call. That was fun.